Hey, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much all for joining us this morning. This forum could not be more timely. We're in the middle of political strife, pandemic-related impacts, supply chain, and inflationary crisis, all wreaking havoc on the world's food supply. Excuse me. Producers are paying 115% more for diesel, when natural gas is up 202%. Fertilizer inputs such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium increased 125% in the cost from January 2021 to 2022, an additional 17% for just the first 3 months of 2022 alone. Now, as the conflict in Europe nears its fifth month, the U.S. and the world face a disrupted global food system, resulting in increased energy prices, fertilizer costs, spikes, and shortages, worsening food scarcities in developing countries. At the same time, American consumers are watching in dismay as their grocery and energy bills skyrocket. Despite these circumstances, the Biden administration and the majority have neglected to take serious action to increase American production. In fact, since the war in Ukraine began, the administration has continued to take nonsensical regulatory and policy actions that have created needless uncertainty for farmers, ranchers, and working families, and has further limited our ability to meet the food demands of our nation and the world. As many of you know, last week, House GOP leader McCarthy and I led more than 90 members of our caucus in sending a letter to President Biden outlining immediate administrative actions to provide real near-term solutions to rising input costs and strengthen the role American agriculture plays in global food stability. So subsequently, I, along with many of those same members, many in the room here, introduced the Reducing Farm Input Costs and Barriers to Domestic Production Act. Now, the bill takes legislative action to reverse many of the more harmful regulatory burdens spearheaded by this administration. The letter and the bill stand in stark contrast to what we've seen from the White House, including their efforts to scapegoat private industry for skyrocketing gas prices and sustain supply chain failures. Today's forum presents another opportunity for Republicans to elevate these issues and the vital need to provide immediate relief to producers and consumers. We're going to hear from a distinguished panel whose expertise will generate a thoughtful discussion around the issue contributing to global food insecurity and critical barriers to domestic production. First, we have Undersecretary Ted McKinney. Ted currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, or NASDA, a position to which he was named in September 2021. Prior to NASDA, Ted was the Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs at USDA, the first person appointed to that position since its creation in 2014. Second, I'd like to welcome James Henderson, a fifth-generation rancher. James operates the 7-Eleven Ranch in La Jara, Colorado, where he raises cattle and farms oats, barley, forage wheat, corn silage, alfalfa, and grass hay on 3,600 acres in the southern San Luis Valley. After some flight complications, unfortunately, he tried really hard to get here in person. He is thankfully joining us virtually today. And last but certainly not least, Ambassador Greg Dowd. Greg currently serves as the Vice President for Global Situational Awareness and Chief Economist at Aimpoint Research. Prior to joining Aimpoint, Greg served in the office of the U.S. Trade Representative as the Chief Agricultural Negotiator. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules. And before I turn it over to our panel for their brief opening remarks and some housekeeping items, this event is live streamed. Folks across the country are watching, as well as our friends in the press. We have about an hour this morning, so after our panelists introduce their work, I'll kick this off the discussion with a question or two, and then turn it over to members for their questions and comments. For our member participants, please try to limit your remarks to a few minutes so we can make sure that everyone who wants to to engage has a chance to do so. And with that, Mr. Undersecretary, I yield to you.
See if I remember how to do this. Yes, that seems to work. Well, Member Thompson, thank you. Chairman Thompson, thank you for your invitation here. And to all of you, I say thank you. Congratulations on a recent passage of a bill that might help free up some international shipping. And I have to say to my good friend Jim Barrett, it's good to see you again, and I loved our time together in Indiana as well. Well, I find myself in a different position, but I want to thank you for the support you provided while I was working with my buddy, Mr. Dowd, here in the trade world at USDA. The wisdom that you showed in creating that position, I think, we hope paid the dividends. I learned, if I learned one thing in that job, it is that if you show up, you can start to make a difference. When you don't show up, it's like you ignoring your constituents. You cannot do that. And so I think we found a wonderful balance where USTR clearly is given the authority to negotiate or renegotiate trade, but in Greg's words, maintenance was my world. And I think we did make a lot of difference. And so I was thrilled when I saw that Secretary Vilsack and the President have announced our good friend and my member, Alexis Taylor, as the nominee to succeed me, and Doug McCaleb to succeed Greg. We think very highly of the two of them, and I think we're on our way, maybe a little later than we all would have liked, but this is the way things go. And so I just want to say thank you for that service. In my role as CEO of NASDA, let me just take 20 seconds on NASDA. We're 106 years old. We represent the state departments of agriculture, commonwealths as well. And we have, like Farm Bureau, we're 50 states or commonwealths, and we have 4 territories: Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and Guam. And we try to represent all of them. Clearly, the bulk is the core here in what we know as the mainland U.S. Amazingly, our members get along remarkably well. I mean, we have about 40% Democrat, about 60% Republican. That can flip every 2 years, and it does change. We're expecting some changes just because of gubernatorial retirements or timeout, and so we'll expect changes again. But we're so pleased, and one of the reasons I was so pleased to take the job is because we see the world in the same light, and I think you experience that in many ways. Maybe not all, but many ways in your role on the House Ag Committee. So we're no different. We're seeing and working through all of the issues that you read about every day. I've just listed a few, and you know them, so I'll be very quick. The economy and inflation, fuel and prices, Russia's war on Ukraine and the fallout from that, fertilizer and inputs, congestion, transportation, COVID, or at least the exit from COVID, and so many things that come from that. I would say that the two things I would say that we're focused on: one, our board wants us to be much more active internationally. Let me assure you, this is not Ted trying to replay his former job. This was the board's decision, and if all goes well, we'll find ourselves making a number of treks internationally, small groups, SWAT teams of 5, to not displace our beloved friends at FAS and USTR, but to serve as an echo chamber, to take your messages, to build trust, to debunk myths. Can you spell chlorinated chicken? All the things that go with that is really an issue of trust, and this is one of the things that I think we both learned when we were doing that. So that's a new for NASDA. The second thing is we're getting much more active. We found our way through some partnerships and some grants through some of the executive branch agencies, FDA, USDA, and EPA, to do some projects that we think will be helpful because we know the states better than they. And that's not a negative statement. It's just that we're local, like you and your constituencies, like you and your staffs are local. And so we're finding great success in doing that. And by doing that, I think we can take what we know and learn and experience on the ground in your districts, in your states and commonwealths, and represent that back as we implement programs like Food Safety Modernization Act, various EPA programs. We're working on a program with the Ag Marketing Service called Group Gap that might serve and help underserved find their way into Walmart and Kroger and other places so much. We'll get into the sensitive issues of the war in Ukraine and congestion, but I'll say that we too are seeing that. I've talked to a lot of my members before this, and I'll offer the following thoughts. We largely made it through the spring okay on the fertilizer business and on the diesel fuel and gasoline business. Now, prices were higher, no surprise there. But by and large, farmers across the states and the Commonwealths made it through. There is still concern about this fall and next spring. Will it come? Will it get there? And at least my very small sampling suggests that it might be a little bit better than we had thought, but that doesn't mean prices will come down. So the cost of inputs will be there. Big concern about cost of inputs on things like crop protection products. We do not see, nor do we hear of price gouging. It's more ingredients to make up those products. And some of those ingredients come from countries around the world that aren't so friendly. I think we're seeing some of that in Russia and the Ukraine, China, for example. And so where these companies and so many others in industry source their ingredients and their products is becoming an issue. You're all over that. I'll not go any further on that. But this is something that we are watching. Mostly, though, we want to extend the hand of friendship. We believe that in many countries in the world, and I saw this in my 490,000 international air miles, the level of respect for U.S. agriculture and the regulatory system is second to none, notwithstanding the problems we may have. When the U.S. says something is safe, by and large, people believe it and they trust it. I remember going to an opening of a Costco in South American country. I want to say Brazil, but it may have been another one. They were wrapped around the field, around the building twice to get there. Now, no doubt price was one of the things, but I handpicked a number of people, and the fact that they could go to 3 aisles that were all U.S. product and know it was safe, it was a high-quality product, and the price was reasonable meant a great deal. And I think that is worth sharing. So we have got to continue this focus on trade. We cannot backslide, we cannot slip because it's so critical. I'll leave the rest to you for your questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Now we'll hear from Mr. Henderson. If you're ready, go ahead.
I'm here. Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
We can hear you just fine. We can see you as well.
Good deal. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here today. My sincere thanks to you and for staff for accommodating my air travel difficulty. But as you said in the beginning, my name is James Henderson. I'm a 5th generation farmer and rancher from the San Luis Valley, which if you need a ping on where that's at, I'm about 40 miles south of the Great Sand Dunes National Park. My family's been farming and ranching here in this valley for 140 years. We're very proud that we've been in continuous family operation for that amount of time. A couple of years ago, we were able to bring my wife's family's farm together with ours. And so we have really these 2 great 5th generation legacies that came together, and hoping that we'll be able to pass that along to 1 or more of my 5 children. Want to start maybe today by quoting Charles Dickens, of all people. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was an age of wisdom and an age of foolishness. I think that really encapsulates where we're at, especially as we think about agriculture and policy and what we see. Maybe to set a little bit of context for kind of where American agriculture has been the last couple of years, because I know you all keep your nose to the grindstone and sometimes it's hard to take a step back and see. If you think it was just a few years ago that we entered into a trade war and saw some pretty significant market disruptions as we had retaliatory tariffs. We had MFP that kind of propped us back up. And then we had phase 1, which was huge for American agriculture. We had USMCA that was negotiated and signed. Great victory again for agriculture, just to fall into a global pandemic with COVID. As somebody that sold my calves in March of 2020, I can tell you how important programs like CFAP were to keeping our farm whole. So really this seesaw, and then we come into the present. where we really see our supply chains fall apart, and we see this huge inflation in the cost of our inputs. And then, as has been mentioned several times already, you see two global juggernauts in grain production go to war with each other. All of these things really kind of come together and play on our psyche, I guess, as American farmers and ranchers in the moment we're at. Where, yes, it's a great time. We see some of our commodities have prices have increased significantly, but the cost of producing those crops have gone up significantly. We're having a hard time getting everything from baling twine to parts. And so best of times, worst of times. What I'm here today to ask you as a farmer is to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success, to create a solid footing for the American farmer to stand on, and make sure that we're not putting policy stumbling blocks in place. Your institution, as well as the agencies, when you enact policy, it has real effects on the ground for our farmers and ranchers. Just a couple of these to enumerate for you today that are of great concern to me. As a Western farmer, irrigation is how we make our living. So when I see this whipsaw that is going on with waters of the United States, we have got to put a stop to that and get a clear, durable, evergreen definition of what is and isn't waters of the United States. Earlier this year, thanks to the Small Business Administration, I was able to drive my truck into a dry creek bed just back of the farm here, and had SBA and EPA and Army Corps on the phone to let them see that my truck was sitting in something that they would potentially consider waters of the United States, and there wasn't a drop of water in it. That's got to stop. The inflation in inputs is, as you mentioned, 115% year over year increase in diesel. This is hitting every American. It hits us as we fill up the cars to take our kids to baseball practice, et cetera. But when I have to fill my 180-gallon tank in my tractor that burns 7 to 10 gallons an hour, I mean, that's $900 a fill. And we burn through that in a day. Imagine the combines that are harvesting wheat across this great country right now with a 330-gallon tank, costing about $1,700 to fill. Those impacts are significant and really affect the bottom line. And it's absolutely ridiculous when we know that we can be energy independent as a country. Second to last, taxes. We cannot tax the American farmer out of business. It is so wrong and so immoral and so damaging to have an estate tax and all of this talk around step-up basis that's been occurring in that town is very concerning. Death tax is the death of family farms. And the last issue I'd raise is our access to labor. Labor and lack of access personally cost me production this year. We weren't able to find enough labor to irrigate and get all of our crops in. So we have ground that is fallow because of lack of labor. And it's something that's going to have to be addressed. And it's really, I think, at a crisis level in this country and something we're going to have to do. So those are just a few of the policy stumbling blocks that I see from my side that need to be addressed so that we can set the American farmer up for success. And I'll welcome questions a little later on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your perspective and input. Now I'm pleased to recognize another good friend, Mr. Dowd. You're recognized for your presentation.
Shutting off. There we go. Recently, we briefed staff on the Senate Ag Committee about the Ukraine. If you would like, we could get Colonel Mark Purdy to come in here and visit with you guys about that. He and I do a little tag team on Ukraine and what that means. That is a pretty interesting conversation. Colonel Purdy is a pretty extraordinary guy. I'm going to go through some this is a little more of an intel discussion of what we have going on here. China is still going to be the world's largest importer of corn at about 18 million tons going forward. That's going to be down from 29 and 23 million tons the last couple of years. But here's the important point. Since the situation with Russia and the Ukraine, Brazil a few weeks ago made a very big decision, historic decision. For the first time ever, they're going to be, Chinese will be allowing the importation of Brazilian corn. And so that's a big game changer in our view and the world market and the dynamics, but the Chinese really didn't have any other options. If you see what's going on right now in China with us, purchases of corn and soybeans have been pretty quiet. Soybean meal prices in the last couple of weeks have come crashing down in China, and that's, I think, in large part because the Chinese economy is not healthy. Although what we do see is the demand for imported meat into China is still quite strong. The impact of $6 diesel fuel on agriculture is still in its very early stages. If you go out west, last year at harvest time, wheat harvest, it was $2.50 a loaded mile. This year it's already $4.50 a loaded mile, if you can find a truck or a trucker. Difficulties on the rail side, enormous volatility in rail rates are not helping this situation. Yesterday had a conversation just trying to wrap my head around diesel. Diesel stocks are at record lows. Some discussion, I don't want to overhype this, but some discussion of possible spot shortages coming in diesel in places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Colorado. With regard to fertilizer, we're picking up that Russian urea exports are thought to be at about 65 to 75% of normal, but to friends and family only. We are watching very closely the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. And if you, in a world map, if you look at those four countries and the European Union and the United States, that's the vast majority of food grown in the world, folks. What's interesting is there is a G7 meeting coming up. Did you know that the BRIC are meeting beforehand on the side? From my perspective, you know, it's the old keep your friends close and enemies closer. If these guys are in a room talking about fertilizer, and we know that they have been talking about fertilizer amongst themselves, my question is, what are we doing? This global fertilizer trade flow situation is not going to be normal for a long time. You're seeing trade flows alter significantly in fertilizer, and I'm concerned, frankly, we're concerned that this is not going to be to our liking. Domestically, right now, where we are is we have about a 10 to 15% carryover or overhang from this year based upon weather issues, differences in crops planted. No one wants to carry expensive inventory right now as we get, as you indicated, getting set up for next year. But the basic premise is we could be in 2023 15, 20, even 25% short. So everybody's keeping an eye on this. Interesting discussion in Chicago about the markets in the last week. There's been a very deflationary tone emerge in the markets. They're kind of headed in this direction of deflation and depression, which I think is overblown, but they're kind of psyched out at the moment. Part of this has to do with interest rates. Now, with regard to interest rates, we know that land values, those land notes are on fixed terms. You're going to probably begin to hear a lot of conversations about early next year about what that interest rate on that operating note is going to be next year. Everything has gone up, including the fact that picking up, and this, I want to be a little sensitive to this. This is intel, this is discussion, but there's a recent discussion apparently about companies such as Bayer and Syngenta raising royalty rates by 20% next year. That is in an environment where we see wheat prices falling. And in fact, it is remarkable to me that wheat prices are now just about the same or just a little bit above where they were before the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. The Ukraine situation is, at this point, they've planted about 93% of their normal wheat crop, about 73% of their normal corn crop, plus or minus. This is an issue of storage in the Ukraine. I don't care what you say, best case scenario, it's more than a year and a half, probably 2 to 2.5 years or more before we're moving grain out of Odessa. And that is the situation, is you've got to move that grain then through Hungary, Poland, Romania, Constanza. I know that one entity did that, traded one boat of corn. It took 4,000 customs documents via the European Union to get that done, and they said they would never do it again. So this is really going to be a difficult situation for the Ukraine in terms of where they're going to put this crop. Was just out west, water, urban sprawl, labor, big discussion out there. And I think the last discussion, Congressman Scott, we talked about the SEC and the ESG rule is something that I hope is all on your radar as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We're going to transition over to some question Q&A portion of the forum. I'll kick that off. As we all know, on May 10th of this year, the United States Solicitor General submitted a brief to the Supreme Court advising the court against hearing a case, the Monsanto Company versus Edwin Hardeman, arguing that federal pesticide registration and labeling requirements do not preclude states from imposing additional labeling requirements, even if those requirements run counter to federal findings. On May 23rd of this year, NASDA joined 53 agricultural groups in sending a letter expressing grave concern with the Solicitor General's brief. The letter further states, quote, at a time when American farmers are striving to feed a world threatened by food shortages and insecurity, the likes of which we have not seen in decades, this reversal policy greatly risks undermining the ability of U.S. agriculture producers to help meet global food needs, end quote. Mr. McKinney, can you provide us with your assessment of the federal government's policy reversal and its implication for producers? Additionally, in the absence of further clarity from the courts, what could the administration do to take corrective action?
Sure. Well, thanks for that good question. Yes, there was a surprise among our members of all types about that decision, and we have not had a chance to talk to them to understand what drove the recommendation that the Supreme's not take it up. Excuse me. We hope to have that, and maybe there's a logical reason, so I haven't had that discussion yet. But having known and worked that industry for a long time, FIFRA is the law of the land. The law is the label. And when you're not defending what is on the label, found to be safe by many, many countries around the world, Codex as well, the United Nations Codex, one of the all-time great creations of the United Nations, it leaves one wondering, is there going to be support or is there an undermining of the effort? So we hope that there is some logical reason why that recommendation was made. We don't understand it yet, but boy, we sure cannot see that continued. Otherwise, we'll see a fraying of the support. Let me tell you, from my travels, the world watches how and what level of support is given to the law of the land as we have known it. So the hope is that it will not affect negatively. We know the trial lawyers, have an interest in these kinds of things, sometimes not so positive when it comes to those kinds of slippages. And so we're just hopeful that it does not cause problems, and we hope that is a one-time only issue because we have got to support these products. Later, I'll come back, if you don't mind, to the EU Green Deal because what they're proposing in terms of their farm to fork branded effort is much more draconian, and it's right on the cusp following, or could be following, decisions like that. So it's a great concern, and we hope that it's a one-time only deal.
Yeah, in absence of the Biden administration taking what we think are important steps on this issue, should Congress be weighing in to provide statutory clarity?
Well, far be it from me to tell you what to do, but the support
to do that, so we welcome
the support that can be provided to lift that up. There's no doubt there's a lot of attacks on many different inputs. I'm convinced it's because people do not understand the value of these products. Let me give you an example. The EU Green Deal has as one of their stated objectives the reduction of fertilizer usage by, I think, 15 to 20%. We accomplished that on our farm not because of a regulatory burden, but because we have soil tested, married up to satellite, and we have variable rate technology. We met the same objective because it was the right thing to do, not because Brussels, in their case, was telling us to do that. We don't want to use any more insecticides or pesticides than we need to. We are down on our farm about 18% on pesticides, specifically insecticides, because we use biotechnology. And for goodness sake, we're down in greenhouse gas reductions because years ago, even decades, we moved to no-till and a minimum till, whereas Europe and others have not. So I'm convinced this is a lot of education, and this is a bully pulpit that you have at your disposal to speak to these kinds of things. So anything that and anything else that can be done to defend the decisions made by EPA and so many other like agencies around the world, OECD type countries, people that have really worthy, good science-based systems, is something that I would support, and I think our members would fully.
Well, thank you. We're seeing, as noted, extremely high input costs for farmers. Diesel up 115%, fertilizer more than 220%. Additionally, EPA is causing uncertainty for crop protection products. Mr. Dowd, how is this impacting producers' planning decisions? More importantly, how might this impact yields?
It's a really good question, and the answer is we don't know yet. We do not see significant demand destruction for fertilizer and inputs right now as a result of price levels. When you have these prices, producers in the short run are still going to get after this thing. We have to, though, back up and understand a little bit of this globally. What's interesting about the global situation is what precipitated this issue with regard to the supply chains was actually the blackouts in China last summer due to the fact that they ran themselves short of coal. They got in a little tiff with Australia, and when you have half the provinces in China having rolling blackouts and you shut down your manufacturing capacity, that doesn't mean that, China doesn't make Roundup or glyphosate, but they make the raw materials that go into that. And so if that factory's not running, at some point here, you're going to have an issue. I think we've worked through the glyphosate issues to the best of my understanding. And, you still have elevated prices. But, a third of all the phosphate fertilizer in the world comes out of China. And we now have had the Shanghai COVID lockdowns. And a big chunk of that manufacturing of that phosphate fertilizer is in that part of the world in China. So I think this is the reason that we cannot assume on the fertilizer side of the equation that things are going to be back to normal anytime soon. And I think, again, my question is, all these other countries are talking to each other. We've seen Brazil's President Bolsonaro go see Putin, is my understanding. These guys are all talking amongst each other. We need to have some pretty in-depth conversations in this country as well about that.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Henderson, it's pretty impressive, fifth generation, the culmination of some great legacy farms there in Colorado. Supporting the next generation of farmers is a huge priority for our members. It's, we need to know who is the next generation. What is that succession plan? What challenges have been overcome to keep that the farm through each generation? And with President Biden's proposal to eliminate stepped-up basis, what uncertainty does this create for farm transitions?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a long, storied history of us being able to keep this farm together. What it is a lot of work and several generations having second jobs, but we've been able to utilize trust and some of those things to move it forward. The problem right now is we are in that process of transition of ownership from my mother. She's ready to retire. Hopefully she's not watching because she'll kick me in the tail if I say she's ready to retire. But it's a very delicate process within a family farm to make that transition. As you can imagine, all of the interpersonal issues and family issues have to be overcome first. If we lost step-up basis today, and my mother were to pass away, the remainder of the farm that's not under my ownership, we would face a tax bill of about $3.5 to $4 million. I do not have $3.5 or $4 million laying around. And I cannot go and get a loan and service that loan to pay that tax bill. What that means we would have to do is we would have to sell land to pay the tax bill. And we have to avoid that. The removal of step-up basis is going to kill family farms. The death tax kills family farms because there's never a lot of cash laying around in a family farm or a family entity. It's all tied up in assets. And we have to be very mindful and strategic in a policy realm because we need farms of all sizes in this country. They each serve their own purpose. Large farms, mid-sized farms like mine, and small farms. We need them all. And my great fear is that if we put obstacles like death tax in the way, we're just going to see more and more consolidation. And in my opinion, that consolidation leads to a less stable long-term food supply.
Ms. Henderson, thanks for your observations. Obviously, all farmers are asset rich and cash poor, and it's criminal that you're forced to sell off a portion of your farm or ranch operation just to buy it back from the federal government or state government for that matter. So thank you so much. Pleased to recognize well, let's see, what title do I want to use here? Chairman in exile of the House Science Committee, the ranking member, Frank Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, soon to be Chairman of the Agriculture Committee. I appreciate the forum you put together, and I would just simply address one point to our friends here on the panels today. We discuss input cost, fertilizer, diesel, gasoline. I find it ironic beyond belief that what we've been discussing, and especially in the national press, is our dependency on Russia and Belarus, our dependency on the Middle East, when we live in a country where we have incredible natural gas reserves, the feedstock for nitrogen fertilizer. We have incredible oil resources, the thing that makes gasoline and diesel. Let's discuss for a moment how in this Democratic majority in Congress and this administration down at the White House, the Biden administration, this discouragement of using oil and gas produced in the United States and turning it into finished products, what the detrimental effect is that is having on farmers and ranchers. If you fix every issue around the world, we're still dependent on the Russians. Shouldn't we be independent? Shouldn't we be using our resources that are dependable and consistent and keeping dollars here at home?
Yes. One of the questions that I have asked Congressman is, we used to have years ago, a pretty robust domestic fertilizer industry.
Yes.
What happened to it was extended years of low prices that these guys couldn't hang in. And so I've asked them what would you need from government to come back and rebuild that industry, and what would you need from government to maintain it? Some pretty interesting answers to that question that I think would be interesting to explore for this committee. Because I think that's, Aimpoint Research and my military guys, the mantra of the company is we do just almost entirely agricultural work, and the message is very clear. Food security is national security. If you've heard other people say that came from us. And this domestic fertilizer industry and the lack thereof, I think, is one of the most important things that we need to be discussing as a nation right now.
Let me just add to that. We had a very, very good discussion with our board only about a month ago on this type of topic. Now, that doesn't mean it was all members, but it was a very good representative sample across Ds, Rs, and across the geography of the states. The key conclusions that we came to was the strategy to look more at electric vehicles is a positive one. Nobody disagreed with that. It might be more appropriate that focus be on urban centers where it's easier to do the charging stations and fill in all the the infrastructure to do that. I think there's a lot of nervousness about trying to see if tractors and maybe even overland trucks have the capacity, when you're pulling a full load, to go onto batteries. So the conclusion in agriculture is that diesel engines, the combustion engine, is going to be with us for some time. In short, maybe we're racing so quickly to electric vehicles that we're denying a lot of other things. We're shortening, we've sent a powerful signal, for example, about oil drilling, but more so the whole business of processing that into the diesel and gasoline. And so our members concluded, and I think we're going to speak to some of you, maybe they already have, that the EV strategy is a good one, but let's lengthen the time in which we implement that and don't just cast aside all that we've had and seen as successful for so long when we need it now. A good bridge strategy are biofuels. We know what it does for the atmosphere and clean air. There's a lot of attention to climate change. We know the value of that from both soy and corn, with soy diesel, renewable fuels, and ethanol. And so maybe it's a rethink on the timeline of moving to electronic vehicles or electric vehicles, and looking at a more midterm strategy that includes biofuels and sustaining the productivity of our wells, our natural gas, and the processing thereof.
I'd simply note, Mr. Chairman, the activists that we serve within Congress who are trying to destroy the fossil fuel energy industry in the United States, if they believe substituting that for energy from a place like Russia, anyone who thinks a Russian gas well is cleaner than an American gas well is silly as hell.
With that, recognize gentleman from Georgia, Representative Austin Scott.
Thank you, gentlemen. And Mr. Henderson, I want to start with you. And certainly, if you're not farming today, you're not going to be farming tomorrow. And if you're not farming tomorrow, you're not going to be farming 10 years from now. And one of the things I think we forget in this country is that about 90% of the food supply comes from about 12% of the farms. And you're in Colorado. I spent a fair amount of time in Cotopaxi, Colorado when I was younger running Longhorns, but I don't remember a whole lot of cotton being grown in Colorado, but I do want to mention to you that in the Southeast, Cargill is paying a different price for the commodity of cotton based on the race of the farmer. Are you aware of that?
I am not aware of cotton markets.
Okay. So Cargill is paying about 6.5 cents a pound more if you're an African-American farmer than if you are not an African-American farmer. I questioned the CEO on that, and he said that they were going to expand that to all races, all commodities. They were going to include Caucasian women in their proposal, but that they would not include Caucasian men. So effectively, they're talking about one set of prices in the commodity markets for Caucasian men and another set of pricing for everybody else that's a farmer. And that is something that we have already seen in the Southeast. It's something that I want to make you aware of as a farmer, that I think we need to be very much aware of the dangers that brings to all of the markets and all of the commodities. And so I appreciate you, and I can only imagine how hard your mom worked to keep that farm in the family, and your grandparents worked to keep that farm in the family, and I certainly hope you're able to keep it for that next generation. Mr. McKinley, I'll move pretty quick on this. You mentioned no-till and how good it is for the environment. Can you do no-till without glyphosate, dicamba, or some other chemical?
No, and this is a point I speak of regularly. No-till and minimum-till really only came in a big way when the invention of chemistries that could go over the top were brought forward, glyphosate being among them, the lead one. And if those go away, whether it's because Europe disallows it and therefore we can't trade with Europe, or because our own EPA or someone else, it is draconian, and there's no other way than to take some form of tillage out there and run the past just like I did as a kid. Yep. And that is not the answer that I think we seek.
So it's going to be worse for the environment, and you're going to reduce your yields. In some way, somehow, the environmentalists think that that's good for America and the environment. Mr. Dowd, I want to talk about the whole Black Sea region for a second. And Russia, Belarus, a tremendous amount of fertilizer comes out of there. I agree with your assessment. I think you're dead on that this fertilizer issue is not going away. It's not going away in 12 months, not going away in 18 months. The 80% number. You mentioned, I think, 93% on wheat and 73% on corn, or did I get that reversed?
That was what Ukraine had planted this year. That's what that's of normal. That's what they got in the ground in the Ukraine.
Okay, so Ukraine puts 50 million metric tons of corn and wheat into the export market, has in the past. I've seen estimates that the world is still assuming that 80% of that supply in Ukraine is going to be available. I think those assessments are unreasonably high. I don't see how they put 80%.
Yeah.
What do you realistically think the Ukrainians are actually not just able to harvest, but get into the market knowing that they can't export through Odessa or the Black Sea?
Yeah. It's the question. And the answer is, to the best people that I talk to in the trade the grain in that part of the world, about 1.5 million tons a month.
Okay.
That can leave the country by rail and truck. So think of it in terms of 50. This is combined wheat and corn,
Right.
sunflower. So that you times that by 12.
Right.
That's not 50.
Yeah. So you're going down by 75%. We in America, we're gonna pay a higher price at the grocery store for some mistakes that have been made. But I'm telling you, the people in Africa and the people in Asia, they're gonna be starving because of what's happening there. And the unfortunate thing is, because of the attacks on American agriculture, we're not going to be able to fill those voids. Could you speak briefly to the ESG issue and what's happening with the SEC and Mr. Gary Gensler and how much damage he's doing to, has the potential to do to the food supply for the world?
Well, Congressman, as you know, I'm a former Senate Ag Committee staffer, and the CFTC was part of my portfolio some 10 years ago when I was staff for Senator Roberts. And this was right after Dodd-Frank. And of course, Gary Gensler was the chairman of the CFTC in those days. And after I left the Senate Ag Committee, I was president of the Commodity Markets Council for many years, where we dealt with everyday CFTC issues. And I'm quite familiar with Mr. Gensler, and that is why when we saw this rule emerge, it was flagged immediately. And I think what people are beginning to understand is the fact that this does not in any way just affect publicly traded companies, because that publicly traded company has to report upstream and downstream, regardless of whether you're a public entity, private entity, individual, farmer, doesn't matter. They have to have correct data, and we're already seeing the legal profession try to figure out how to deal with this on the corporate side, and on the activist side, look at ways in which they can attack industry and folks if that data is incorrect, which is going to be really, really difficult to do.
I'm over my time limit, but there are a tremendous number of threats out there. I appreciate all of you being here.
I thank the gentleman. The members are running short on time, but if we could keep it to 2-3 minutes, so I want to get through everybody's questions. Next, we represent another gentleman from Georgia, Representative Rick Allen.
Well, I want to thank you for this, GT, putting this together, and it's important. I had a roundtable with a number of my farmers in the district last Friday, and of course I heard their frustration with what's going on in this country. I hear your frustration today, and believe you me, you're no more frustrated than we are sitting right here. You know, until we unleash energy production, until we get a handle on trade, which has been non-existent in this administration, and until this Congress is willing to come together and do something about the mess this country is in, you know, we're just going to continue this frustration. Mr. McKinney, what I'd like to know, obviously, you know, the labor input costs. We had 160 million people working in this country prior to the pandemic. We got 138 million people working today. And we got a 3.8% unemployment rate. What happened to 22 million people? We've tried to pass immigration reform to make it easier for farmers to get labor in this country, and we can't get it through this Congress. These are critical to the future of our country and the national security. Mr. McKinney, just real quickly, and Mr. Dowd and our farmer, real quickly, what do we need to do?
Well, the Great Resignation was real, and I think there were several reasons for that, but one of them is that there was just a lot of money flowing out, I think probably with good intent to support many of those people, but it ended up making them very comfortable in not working for a while. We're now starting to see those funds run out and bring it back. Our example with that was when the Ag Marketing Service was asked and ordered to provide $600 per employee. There were grocery workers, meat process workers, farm workers, et cetera. And we looked at the possibility of managing that, distributing that, because we know agriculture pretty well. We ended up not doing it because the word we were getting from all of our suppliers, the meat processors, grocery workers, is first, how in the world do you do it? And secondly, they didn't want those monies going out, not because they don't care for their employees, but they'd lose them for another 6-8 weeks. So there's a combination of things. We're looking at that, and by the way, looking at labor, we think that H-2A revisitation, something you all have taken up, is a big factor here. There is a need for more of that, but so too is some of the policy that we've got to adjust back into the reality of a post-COVID world.
Quickly, the answer to your question, sir, is we're going to use technology to increase productivity in agriculture. And I've talked with Ted about this. In order to be able to utilize that technology, regulatorily, it has to be approved by the government.
Exactly.
What's holding us up is the fact that we can't get approvals.
Right. That's the frustration that we have. Our farmer, sir, would you care to
Yes,
comment?
sir. Yeah, labor is huge. H-2A, we looked into that this spring for the first time, but there's some stuff in there that just really prevents us from using that as a good solution. I need range workers to watch the cows on summer range up in the mountains. I can get a range worker to watch the cows, but under that contract, I cannot have that same range worker, drive the ATV
Right.
half a mile down the field
Right.
and fix the fence.
Well, I have signed on
you've seen-
to a combination of legislation and letters, 17 items here to deal with every one of these things. And it's going nowhere in this Congress. So I demand this Congress get to work and have a sense of urgency and this administration and solve these issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now we're going to North Carolina. Representative Dave Rouser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got a gazillion thoughts, and trying to pull all my thoughts down to a few minutes is a significant task at the moment. But I think the bottom line is this administration has declared war on American agriculture and American energy. And we got to figure out how to survive the next 2 years. We'll see what happens with the elections in November. We have a farm bill that'll be reauthorized, rewritten next year. Farmers have to be able to cash flow if they're going to survive to fight the next day. From a support structure, any thoughts y'all have in terms of ways that we can help, compensate for the rising input costs, because those are going to stay probably at a higher level for some time to come. Meanwhile, commodity prices will probably drop over that period that correlates with it. Any thoughts on what's going to be WTO compliant that we can do to allow our folks to survive to live another day?
I'll let Greg handle the WTO question, though I have a lot of interest in that, and we've got to get that fixed. What I'm hearing from our members is that we've got to support the insurance pieces of Farm Bill and the Title I commodity programs. These are at the core. There's always the debate on how much we support, those who need food and hunger. We're hearing our members say, have we gone too far with that? They don't know that. They're trying to gather the data because Many of our members administer those farm to school, farm to food bank, farm to whatever programs. And so we're going to have to figure that out. But that's one of the things that they're saying at this point in time is we've got to get some of those fixed, but let's not blow up a pretty doggone good farm bill that was formed by you all a few years ago. Always look at new things. Hemp is one of our new things. Conservation and climate change is one. We think there's a way forward. We think ag can be the solution, or at least a big part of the solution, not some of the problem as is alleged, as the allegations come sometimes. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in this farm bill.
Greg?
Crop insurance.
Let me ask this. In a lot of areas of the country, we deal with flooding. My district, if you have a big rainfall in Raleigh, there's a chance portions of my district get flooded. If you have a hurricane that sits on the coast a little too long, the inland part of my district gets flooded. There's a lot of talk in my state and in other places that are dealing with that problem. Is there a way, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head here without a great deal of pro or con analysis on my own part, but is there any, for example, potential program that would be WTO compliant that could, for example, help compensate farmers that preemptively reroute floodwaters, where, for example, where you have more unproductive land, and you allow that portion to be flooded so that other areas further downstream are not flooded. There's a lot of different concepts that we're looking at in my part of the world, because this is a big issue for us moving forward. North Carolina is a very, very strong agriculture state, but we have a ton of people moving in. And you got all that new asphalt, all those new roofs, that water hits it, goes to the storm drain, goes straight to the river, and, floods agriculture.
I don't think there are any WTO implications of that, but I will say this, and I'm glad you brought it up. Out west, I was just out in Boise. It will make you cry, the amount of really good farmland out there that's under concrete now and asphalt.
Yeah. That leads me to one last question, real quick. How much farmland has been bought that is, there are a lot of billionaires around the world who buy U.S. farmland. How much of that is in productivity versus not? Do we know?
Don't know the answer to that.
I don't know that answer. I'd like to address your other question, though. North Carolina has clearly proven itself to be very innovative over the years. Our Commissioner Troxler is one of the deans of our organization. And if you have new, good ideas like that, boy, I think you should at least look at them. Don't dismiss them outright. It doesn't sound like you are. You've got a proven track record in that state.
I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman of South Dakota, Congressman Johnson.
Well, thank you, GT. I appreciate that, Mr. Ranking Member. I share so much of the frustration my colleagues have talked about today about how many bad decisions the administration has made. I mean, we've got inflation, particularly in the energy sector. We've got this administration's fascination with overregulation and the kinds of threats that WOTUS and other similar provisions cause. And then we've got policies that don't encourage people to work. So we've got a serious workforce shortage, and so many of my colleagues have talked about each of those. If I wanted to focus on some of the positives, I would say there have been some more modest policy gains. I think E15 on Friday, once fully implemented, E15 could put another 8 billion gallons of homegrown clean American fuels into the fuel supply chain. That would be a big deal. And then, Mr. McKinney, thanks for you calling out the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. Worked really hard on that over the course of the last year. And it's not a silver bullet, but it is going to help. So my question for you gentlemen would be, given that politics is the art of possible, what could we actually get done? We talked about the Farm Bill and about crop insurance and other things, but over the course of the next 6 or 12 months, what should we focus on to actually try to help the American agricultural producer? What can Congress do?
I'll take a first cut at that. I think there is a terrific model that's working so well with both parties on the Hill and the administration, and it's the Foodnag Climate Alliance that you have no doubt talked about. It's a coming together of all the commodity groups, the farm groups that care about this, And it is remarkable to me how civil that whole discussion has been. No doubt they've spoken to many of you. They've done the same with the Democratic side and the executive branch. And we think that is the right track, the right pathway forward, because it lets farms and agriculture be an answer, be a solution to the climate change issue. Now, that's only one issue of many that you listed, but I would say that the behaviors being exhibited by all is exactly what we just saw with the bill that you helped co-sponsor and help lead. And bipartisanship always wins, and I think that is one where we can and should come together. How that looks, what it looks like, yet to come. Not going to project what that looks like, but there's a real there.
Mr. Dowd?
I would say relief on the regulatory side with particular emphasis on energy.
I think that's very well said. And finally, Mr. Henderson, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I think the important thing is to get the regulations out from under our feet and let the American farmer do what we do best, and that's provide not only food, but fuel and fiber for our population and the global population as well.
Well, thanks very much, gentlemen. I would just close by noting that I share the urgency that Mr. Allen spoke so eloquently about. I mean, if we don't continue to take some steps forward, these policies are going to be a threat to American agriculture, and it's going to be a threat to global food security. We have an opportunity to get it right. Let's get after it.
I thank the gentleman, and now recognize the gentleman from Indiana, Dr. Jim Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. McKinney, I just want to share with you how proud Indiana is of your work first as the Indiana Director of the Indiana Department of Agriculture, then as an Undersecretary for the USDA, and now your work with NASDA. But my question relates to global food insecurity, with the supply chain interruptions, with Russia invading the Ukraine. Do you think your members are looking forward enough, especially with some of the things the EPA is doing, to be able to produce more food to feed the world?
I would say our members are attentive to that, but in a different way. It's a little like the speech I gave when I was a teenager in 4-H and FFA about how proud I was as a farmer that we were feeding as a family at that time 85 people, other people around the world. It's now 165. They want to do everything they can to help their farmers and ranchers be as productive as they can, knowing that a great deal of that is exported. So I think it comes back to some of the questions about regulatory modesty, if I can use that word, not overburdening the farmers or anybody in the process thereof, particularly at an acute time of such pressure points as we have now, not the least being the Russia-Ukraine issue. But yes, they are attentive. And one of the things they want to do when we do get on the road with these SWAT teams on international visits is to make sure they're putting an ankle, a knee, waist deep into the business of food security. We want, and they want, to understand that more.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dowd, do you have any comments on that?
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Congressman Thompson, for doing this. Thank you all for being here. I represent the 1st District of Kansas, a large ag producing district. Combines are rolling right now, trying to get wheat cut. My brother and dad run our family farm. We got a new sprayer yesterday, and they circulated pictures, and my dad was beaming. It looked like he had another grandchild or something. But, such is the life of modern-day agriculture. I think it's really important that we really drive home this issue of ag inflation. I know we're televised. For the country to understand, when the statistics come out that say that inflation nationally is 8 to 10%, tell our farmers that are paying 300% to 400% increases in the price of fertilizer in Kansas. It is way, way, way beyond 8 to 10% is what our ag producers are experiencing. To be very practical, I've talked to a farmer from Wallace County, a wheat farmer, that's going to spend $70,000 more this year than last year just in the cost of nitrogen. we got a quote this week that to build a 1 mile of 4-barb red brand fence a year ago cost $10,000 a mile. Today it costs $20,000 a mile. The price of cattle has not doubled in the last year. We're in the process. We're going to crush our producers, and it's federal spending. It's this ridiculous war on fossil fuels and biofuels. It's regulations, and then you add all the geopolitical to it. And the infuriating thing is, of those 4 things, the first 3 are all self-inflicted. All these things are self-inflicted. We could reverse course here and make tremendous progress. And then we come along, and I'm really glad that Mr. Henderson, you brought this up, and now the administration is proposing increasing taxes on these people. So here we've made life difficult, we've crushed income, and the proposal is to raise taxes. Unbelievable. I was with the largest nitrogen producer in Kansas this week, and there are 3 ingredients that go into nitrogen fertilizer, our biggest input, and those ingredients are air, water, natural gas. The price of air in Kansas has not increased. The price of water in Kansas has not increased. The price of natural gas is what's driving this whole thing. And so with the time I have left, my question is for you, Mr. Henderson. Where do you see farm income next year? Meaning if commodity prices stay about where they are, and with the input costs where they currently are, what is your prediction on farm income for next year and then moving forward?
I would say that farm income would be a little less than it is today. I had an old timer tell me once on commodity prices, it doesn't matter how far you can throw a rock in the air, it's going to come back down just as fast. And we've been seeing that, and we have not seen equivalent drop in our input costs. And so unless we get a handle on energy production, I think it's going to really put a pinch on farmers as we start into the next crop year, as the wheat crop, as you well know, that's going to be going in shortly, will be at the increased input level with prices coming back down from what we saw earlier this spring.
Great, thank you. I see my time's expired. I would just close with this. I know, Mr. Dowd, you said that food security is national security. I completely agree. And knowing that is true, I think we've got to acknowledge that our nation is less secure today than we have been for a long, long time because of this crazy ag policy and this crazy policies being pushed by the administration. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, please to recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly appreciate the witnesses being here today. And Mr. Dowd, you mentioned something about us not being at the table when the conversations about fertilizer are happening around the world. And I'm a freshman, so I'm kind of learning the process. But at times, I've heard maybe that we would lower our tariffs on fertilizer to allow us to be more competitive. But if we're not at the table, what do you see going forward? What are some things we can do to help maybe get us to the table in the fertilizer market to help kind of encourage or at least decrease cost up front? I'm just asking the question. I'm not quite sure the answer. That's why I'm asking.
Well, the answer to that question is Vladimir Putin has clearly indicated that, as I indicated, we think about 65 to 75% of Russian urea is leaving Russia. But he's made it very clear that it's only going to friends and family. And that probably isn't us right now. So how does that change global trade flows for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash? And what are these other countries doing from a nationalistic standpoint and having conversations to procure those supplies versus what are we doing? Does that help? Am I doing a good job of explaining?
It seems like it could be a sort of a supply issue from Russia, and no matter, the demand's going to remain the same here. So even if we adjust tariffs, you still see a problem on the horizon. Is that kind of what I'm gathering?
We import about 10-12% of our nitrogen needs, and so I think, and so you can use technology, biologics are coming, there are things there that we can work with the nitrogen side. On the potash side, most of that's coming Mosaic in Canada, so hopefully we have a good enough relationship to deal with that. I think it's on the phosphorus side that is pretty interesting. That we, and on that, one of the big places you can get that is Morocco. Well, the ITC, we've done a pretty big self-inflicted wound here with regard to countervailing duties or anti-dumping tariffs on that. that I think next month maybe have the opportunity to be revisited a little bit. I'm not going to wade into that, but that's an important conversation that needs to get sorted out here.
Sure, and Mr. McKinney and maybe Mr. Henderson, I don't have a whole lot of time, but we talk about the labor shortage, and typically in the economy, when there's a recession, you see small business owners, farmers, whoever the like, lay people off. But right now we're looking for labor. So how do we soften that landing as you see businesses having to adjust? We're talking about visas for farm workers, but how do we adjust to make that a soft landing as we take the majority? Because like I said, typically we'd be laying people off, but right now we don't have enough workers. So how do you see that playing out?
Well, right now, our advocation in H-2A and any related programs is to make them more flexible. You heard our colleague from Colorado say that they can do X but not Y, and on a farm, you're basically assigned all responsibilities. So allowing some flexibility and year-round capability. These are good people. They're good workers. They want to work. And so we think it's some modest changes in the H2O or H2A programs, maybe the H2O programs as well. We'll get to that in a minute.
Sure.
But in the H2A programs, the modest flexibility, and it doesn't get into all the draconian views on one side of the political aisle or the other. So we think there's a there, and I'm not sure we're going to see many layoffs if we hit a recession. There is that much need for this kind of labor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back. I know we have other members who need to ask questions.
I thank the gentleman. Now, please recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Representative Kamik.
I appreciate that. I have a lot of questions, and I could really talk to you guys for hours on end. I mean, you hit on phosphorus, and of course, representing at Florida. Huge issue, of course, and as I said, as the lone Republican for House Agriculture for the state of Florida, there's a lot of specialty crops and issues within that space. I could go on and on and on, but I do want to touch on something that we are working on and get feedback from Mr. Henderson, and after he's done, if you guys want to weigh in, that would be great. There's a small ad hoc group of us that are focused on guest worker reform. This is the political hot button issue. We can go on and on and on, and I've heard several times today, of course, that H-2A needs to be reformed. I agree, but let's be honest. The political realities of dealing with Department of Labor and H-2A in the face of both the left and the right, it's not going to allow us to do that. So, Mr. Henderson, would you be opposed to a new guest worker program housed under USDA that gets rid of the adverse wage effect, that deals with both a pre-vetted pool and a domestic pool, that provides certainty for the employer and the employee, does not put the burden of transportation or housing on the employer, but is for ag specifically, it is not employee specific. They cannot abscond into construction or hospitality. It would be ag specific, so they could actually chase the seasons using different contractors and various employers, but specific to ag, but enough flexibility that if you have a diesel mechanic from Mexico who wants to come and work for the season and he happens to work on a tractor, that won't disqualify him for that particular operation or the program if he is not only picking, but also fixing. Would something like that, something very, very targeted, without touching H-2A, be something that you could actually take advantage of? Without dealing with the H-2A issue, because and I say that because I feel, especially coming from a state that relies heavily on H-2A workers, the year-round aspect of Florida agriculture takes H-2A out for so many of our folks, particularly in dairy, timber, the nursery growers, equine industry, you name it, we've got it, and the year-round aspect makes H-2A almost untenable. And I honestly don't even know where to look because you're on camera and there's like 18 cameras in this room, so I'm sorry, I'm just kind of looking around the room. Would something like that work? And I say that because you talked about looking into the program, but it wasn't really tenable. And also, would changing the definition of an agricultural worker be beneficial in the sense of anything or anyone in the supply chain up into the point of retail? So I'm talking processors, our truck drivers, et cetera, dealing specifically with agricultural products.
What I need, Representative, is I need hard workers. And unfortunately, in our domestic chain, I can't find anybody that's qualifications aren't just watching 2 episodes of Yellowstone and thinking that that qualifies them to be my range rider. But we need the workers, and how we get there, I think, is open for debate. But as far as political reality, that's what we need you folks to do, is to engage in that process to get me the workers so that I don't have land that's fallow because I couldn't get somebody to do the irrigation.
I understand. And I hear you loud and clear. I think that there is a path forward. It tends to get politicized, and I do think that our ad hoc working group, we can navigate the political realities of the Farm Workers Union as well as Numbers USA. I do think we can do it because we have to do it, and there is no option because we all in this room agree that food security is national security. So I would love to hear, I've got a few minutes, I've got 1 minute left if Mr. McKinney or Mr. Dowd wants to weigh in, but obviously you can tell I'm pretty passionate about this issue.
I love the ideation process, and I don't think any good idea should be discarded. Now, we also don't like to duplicate efforts, and so clearly there is going to be the alleged duplication. But goodness, it sounds great to me. I think there's a lot of plus to that, and it might take away some of that, some of the concerns.
Excellent. I'm gonna put you on our little palm card with that quote. Right? No? Well, I appreciate everybody's commentary today, and I think that we do have a path forward. We really do, especially if we try to navigate some of the challenges with existing H-2A operations who have invested so much in being compliant with the program. So I'm looking forward to more engagement from you both, as well as our farmer, Mr. Henderson from Colorado, my home state. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, future Chairman, for hosting this hearing today.
Well, thank you, and we're going to allow the final word here from the gentleman from Tennessee. Congressman Rose is recognized.
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Thompson, and certainly, hopefully, the next chairman of the House Committee on Agriculture. I appreciate his tremendous leadership as the agriculture community faces unprecedented challenges to feed our growing and hungry world. Today's forum is just one small example of the leadership we are all looking forward to having in the chair when Republicans regain control of the House in the next Congress. Republicans have offered, I believe, real solutions like the bill introduced by my friend Ranking Member Thompson, which rolls back these burdensome regulations by the EPA and the SEC, spurs domestic production, and takes concrete action towards lowering the cost of inputs necessary to farm. Mr. Henderson, I, like you, currently operate a beef cattle operation that's been in my family. I'm the 8th generation since 1790. And, you know, I often remind folks that farmers, I believe, are the first conservationists. We don't abuse our land. We hope to pass it on. Like me, you probably want to pass off your land to the next generation. You've already spoken about that this morning. Would you share, just for the committee's benefit, the range of practices that you already implement to fulfill that mission of passing the land on to the next generation?
Yeah, of course, we take very good care of our soils. We're becoming more and more efficient with the application of water out here in the West. Our grazing practices have changed over time to make sure that we don't overgraze. I think one of the best improvements that we've made is in the genetics of our cattle. We raise more beef per ounce with less greenhouse gas than we ever have. And I think we deserve recognition for the huge amount of greenhouse gas reduction that we've had in the beef industry since the 60s, and the infinite improvement that we're going to make in the coming years as we fund research into that area as far as enteric methane emissions from cattle.
It sounds very much to me like most farmers that you are already being a good steward of your land and the resources that you have at your disposal. Would you agree that you don't need input from the Securities and Exchange Commission about how to properly care for your land?
I would agree, and I think that that potential rule will serve more as a stumbling block and get in the way of what the industry groups are already doing in the greenhouse gas emission space. I think it's just going to run a whipsaw through the progress that we're making right now.
Thank you. And I was proud to lead with many of the people who've been in this room this morning a letter to the SEC calling them out for the proposed climate change rule that they have in front of them. And I really am concerned as a member of the Financial Services Committee and a farmer about who has a great interest in our public markets, about the SEC getting distracted from their core purpose of protecting investors and encouraging capital formation in our country and maintaining fair and orderly markets. I think they've gotten out of their lane, and I appreciate all of my colleagues joining with me in calling out the SEC and this new proposed rule. Mr. McKinney, with the time I have left, as a former Commissioner of Agriculture for the state of Tennessee, I greatly appreciate the work that NASDA does in representing state departments of agriculture at the national level. The issues we face today disrupt our food supply and security, which of course affects everyone. As someone who represents both Republicans and Democrats, is there any advice you wish you could give Congress on coming up with bipartisan solutions to address the increasing food cost and supply chain disruptions?
Well, we talk a lot, and we try to share those things that are common bonds. And you have good people. I mean, Charlie Hatcher succeeded you, or is the latest in the long line there in Tennessee, and one of the all-time good ones. All I can say is that I'm glad we're in agriculture, because we do tend to pull the rope in the same direction more than most other sectors. Even in the most disputed of issues, we tend to find ways to get along, and that's something that we pursue. We don't always achieve it, but we usually do. And the only thing I can say is we have committees where we have Ds and we have Rs, and we let them work those things out. We have a board that is balanced geographically and politically, and so these are things that we work very hard to do, but at the core, it's just they want to do right by a farmer and a rancher, and it's amazing what that can deliver.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Ranking Member Thompson, for the opportunity to participate today, and I appreciate our panelists. I yield back.
Well, I appreciate gentlemen from Tennessee participating. Really thankful to all Mr. McKinney, Ms. Dowd, Mr. Henderson for your participation today too, in bringing your expertise, your experience on an issue that is a significant issue. Thanks to my colleagues for participating. I want to say we had two members who had to be pulled away, so I want to mention by name. Our ranking member, Natural Resource Committee, was with us for a while here, Bruce Westerman, and also Scott Franklin from the great state of the Sunshine State of Florida. Both had to had to leave before we could get the chance to hear from them. The Biden administration's excessive spending and harmful regulatory agenda, because of that, we have inflation that sits at a 40-year high, and consumers are facing near 9% increase in food prices. I don't know how many times I hear conversations among people from home where they're talking about the struggles of, do I fill up my car or truck to get to work, or do I buy more groceries? That was self-inflicted. That was unnecessary, and quite frankly, President Biden, his administration, owns that problem. This is that 9% increase, near 9% increase, is the largest increase since the Carter administration. American families are being harmed. The people who provide us our food, our fiber, our building materials, our energy resources, all those folks in what I like to call today essential America, because they provide American families everything they need each and every day that is essential in their lives, they're being harmed. And it's self-inflicted by the Biden administration. So the solutions are pretty straightforward. And And I'm really proud of the fact that Republicans and led by the agriculture Republicans most recently last week, but as a whole team, the Republicans here in the House are advancing effective and near-term solutions. These are not things that, most recent things that we put forward are not things that require an act of Congress. It requires the use of a pen by, and we'll be glad to send him a couple if he needs them, to President Biden to reverse what he started on day one of his inauguration. Very proud as we're working here doing this work and continuing our hard work to be able to serve those who feed us and all American farmers. While we're here, we received notice that the American Farm Bureau Federation has endorsed and put in writing their support for H.R. 8069, the Reducing Farm Input Costs and Barriers to Domestic Production Act. And so we're not going to stop there. This panel today was an important part of our continued work because what's at stake are higher unaffordable prices for those who provide for us and for all American families. But the implications here as well, as stated well by our witnesses and quite frankly my colleagues, is in the near term future, we're going to see massive hunger, starvation, and death by famine that we have not seen in our lifetime in many different parts of the world. And American farmers can be part of the solution to help alleviate that, but not with the policies that we have seen advanced by the Biden administration over the past 18 months. So thank you everybody for your participation and your attendance today. And votes have been called about 20 minutes ago.